Hello, and welcome to our video group project. Our topic for this video is the Battle of Guadalcanal, the first major offensive launched by Allied forces against Japan. Operation Watchtower was the code name for the United States attack on Guadalcanal. A primary motivation for the American offensive was to maintain the initiative in the Pacific theater. In June of 1942, the United States achieved a clear victory against Japan at the Battle of Midway. Japan, having lost 4 of their 6 aircraft carriers, was rocked back on its heels. Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, Admiral Ernest J. King, saw the opportunity to seize the initiative by attacking Japan at a place of his choosing. Several advisors to Admiral King warned him of the difficulties involved with planning and executing the attack on such short notice. However, Admiral King understood that the opportunity to solidify the initiative was too great to pass up. He pressed forward with plans for the operation. Guadalcanal, a tiny island in the Solomon Islands chain, would be the objective. A successful attack and occupation of the island would not only give the United States a firm grasp on the initiative, but also put themselves in position to punch a hole in the extended defensive front that Japan had established to prevent a mainland attack. From an operational standpoint, the capture of the island would give the United States a base of operations significantly closer to Japan than anything they had currently held. Holding a functioning airstrip in such proximity to Japanese strongholds in Rabaul and New Britain would be a significant achievement. On August 7, 1942, the United States Marine Corps 1st Marine Division landed on Guadalcanal. Having only arrived on the island 1 month before, the Japanese had begun construction on an airfield. Most of the Japanese forces on Guadalcanal on August 7 were members of that construction battalion, and they quickly withdrew from their positions as the Marines landed. The Marines established a beachhead, took the airfield, and established a defensive perimeter to its south. They would rename the airfield Henderson Field after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine pilot killed at the Battle of Midway. During the landing of the Marines, air attacks by Japanese aircraft based in Rabaul damaged 2 U.S. naval ships. Guadalcanal Task Force Commander Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher assessed the vulnerability of his ships and decided to withdraw his aircraft carrier task forces on just the second day of the battle, ceding air superiority to the Japanese. That night, in what would come to be known as the Battle of Savo Island, Japanese cruisers mounted a naval counterattack that resulted in the sinking of 4 U.S. heavy cruisers. It was at this point that the U.S. Navy suspended all transport to the Marines stationed on Guadalcanal. Marine General Alexander Vandegrift, commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, strenuously objected to the abandonment that Marines would come to call the naval bug-out. Fletcher left roughly 19,000 Marines stranded on the island with barely enough ammunition and food to last just 10 days, almost no medical supplies, and without their 155mm heavy artillery. The minimal food rations were supplemented by stores left behind by the Japanese construction battalion, mostly rice and dried fish. Lack of food, exposure to dysentery and malaria, the seemingly incessant bombardment from Japanese warships and bombing by Japanese planes, and the impossibly hot and humid climate made mere survival by these Marines a full-time job. Yet, with all these hardships, the Marines somehow found the will to fight. The Battle of Guadalcanal saw vicious fighting in the air, on the land, and at sea. Key naval battles included the Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, the Battle of Cape Esperance on October 11 and 12, and the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands on October 26. These battles impacted each side's ability to resupply and reinforce troops on the ground, as well as the Japanese Navy's ability to bombard American positions around Henderson Field. So many ships would be sunk on each side that the waters north of the island would earn the nickname Iron Bottom Sound. The fighting on land by the now hungry and heavily fatigued Marines was ferocious. The Japanese mounted 3 major assaults designed to recapture Henderson Field. The Battle of the Tenaru began in the early morning of August 21. The frontal assault was repelled by the Marines, killing nearly 800 of the 917 Japanese soldiers who mounted the attack. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, later referred to as the Battle of Bloody Ridge, began on the night of September 12. The battle raged for 2 days, with waves of Japanese attacks moving against well-placed Marine defensive positions. By the time the Japanese retreated, they had suffered over 850 losses. The final major assault by the Japanese was the Battle of Henderson Field on October 23. By this time, the 1st Marine Division had been reinforced by Marines from the 2nd Regiment, over 4,000 men from the 3rd Marine Provisional Brigade, and the U.S. Army's 164th Infantry Regiment. After fierce fighting that stretched throughout the night, the Marines once again held their position. American estimates of Japanese casualties in this battle alone exceeded 2,200. I'll take a moment here to share with you that the Marine circled in red is my mother's father, Private Alvin Stevens. He survived the Battle of Guadalcanal, where, like many Marines and soldiers did, he contracted malaria. Deemed too sick to fight, he was shipped to Massachusetts to serve out his enlistment standing guard at a naval hospital. His wife joined him there, and that's where my mom was born. My grandfather lived long enough to know all of his great-grandchildren. Naval skirmishes continued through November. The U.S. perimeter surrounding Henderson Field was expanded. In December, the United States Marine Corps 1st Division finally departed the island for recuperation. On February 8, 1943, the Japanese evacuated their final troops from the island. On February 9, Americans declared the island secure. In total, the Battle of Guadalcanal claimed the lives of over 30,000 Japanese and over 7,000 Americans. Thousands of these deaths were from tropical disease and starvation. Combined, the two navies lost a total of almost 50 ships. However, the greater, irreplaceable loss for the Japanese was the hundreds of elite aviators killed in the air battles. The victorious campaign at Guadalcanal convinced Americans at home, as well as those in combat, that victory over Japan was possible. It gave the United States a forward position to directly threaten the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. The loss was significant for Japan, both strategically as well as materially. Already at a production disadvantage to the United States, the loss of 24 ships and over 600 airplanes was crippling. On the strategic side, while Japanese advances in the Pacific were halted at Midway, it was the defeat at Guadalcanal which cemented Japan's defensive posture. The war against Japan was far from over, but the mission of the battle was successful. The United States clearly held the initiative, and they would never lose it for the remainder of the war.